Dear students, today we will be talking about epigraphy as a source of historical study and information. The Indian subcontinent has vast amounts of epigraphy, and this plays a significant role in expanding historical dimensions. Epigraphy is the study of inscriptions. An inscription literally means writing engraved on some object, writes Professor D.C. Sarkar. Inscriptions can be found on rocks, tablets, temple walls, stone monuments, stone and copper plates, or any other durable material. The durability of the material on which these messages for posterity are etched is extremely important because it helps overcome the ravages of time. In fact, inscriptions help historians to present perspectives that have been denied to them from other perishable sources. Now, inscriptions offer authentic source material to scholars, and these epigraphic findings are used to corroborate evidence from other sources like proclamations, official documents, and literature. The significant feature about inscriptions is that they cannot be rewritten or modified by posterity, as this can be seen sometimes in the case of literature. Now, Richard Salomon tells us that epigraphy is extremely significant because, apart from political history, multiple aspects of the cultural patterns of traditional India can be deciphered through these inscriptions. In fact, inscriptions form an important background to chronological and geographical information. They form a vital part of chronological and geographical information, and therefore the arts, language, and literatures are benefited by this. In fact, the dates of original compositions of a literary work can often be derived from inscriptions. So, as a very important source of historical evidence, Professor D.C. Sarkar tells us that there is no aspect of the life, culture, and activities of Indian civilization that cannot be deciphered or gleaned from inscriptions. In fact, the period under review, as I had said in the beginning, holds before us innumerable inscriptions which have been deciphered and provide information about historical personages and events that have not come to light from any other source. In fact, these inscriptions have been analyzed by historians in multiple ways. Some have projected the rhetoric of sovereignty and dominance and indicated the spatial stretch of political control. Also, numerous social, economic, and cultural patterns have been teased out by in-depth research into epigraphy and inscriptions by scholars over a long period of time. Apart from these, we can see the rhetoric of triumphalism that has been expressed through prashastis. Divide inscriptions into two broad categories. All right? There were inscriptions that had been done by the ruling authority or on behalf of the ruler. Apart from this, there were inscriptions by private individuals. Who were these people? These were people who had made donations to temples or arranged for resources for the installation of images. So, in the early medieval period, public works, there was a lot of construction and there was a lot of importance placed on erecting public works like the digging of a water tank, for the construction of a step well, as well as measures for the improvement of agriculture. And we see many private persons actually donating to these projects. So it was quite common that small inscriptions were erected on those installations that had been made with their money. And this was quite common in the early medieval period. Sometimes the names of the kings during whose time these installations were erected were etched on these inscriptions. Apart from this, we find that prashastis or eulogistic compositions were sometimes etched onto the stone pillars which were there to commemorate new public works. There were also multiple engravings on temples and pilgrimage sites, right? So temples and pilgrimage sites had numerous dedications engraved on their walls. The temples of Bhubaneswar, Simhachalam, Kanchipuram are just some of the thousands of Indian temples that can be cited as an example. Now, usually the ruling elite, that is the kings, the chiefs, and royal officers were the donors here. But we find that many ordinary people donated to these projects, sometimes from afar away. Apart from this, we find that visiting pilgrims also contributed to these installation and to these temple building activities and expected that a written eulogy would be etched on the temple walls to which they had contributed their money. Now, prashastis were an important group among inscriptions. The subject matter of elaborate prashastis could be the grant of a village or a small slice of land. They could also be the commemoration of conquest or the construction of a temple or water tank. Now, prashastis were mostly in Sanskrit and were remarkable for their literary finesse. In fact, we can mention the Deopara inscription, which was an eulogy of Vijaya Sena, the grandfather of Lakshmana Sena of Bengal, by the court poet Umapati Dhara in the 12th century. The engraving was done by Sulapani, an extremely renowned artisan of the time, and therefore it was devoid of all mistakes. Here I should just mention that if the artisan was not competent enough, the inscriptions came down to us or have come down to us. Some inscriptions have definitely come down to us with errors and mistakes. The Velvikudi inscription of the Pandyas talks about the grant of the renewal of the grant of Velvikudi village to a Brahman. This was an 8th century inscription. It was a bilingual copper plate inscription written both in Tamil and in Sanskrit. Let us come to copper plate inscriptions now. We can begin with the Jagjivanpur copper plate inscription of Mahendrapala of the 9th century. This was written in Siddhamatrika script, and it proved that Mahendrapala actually belonged to the Pala dynasty and he was not a Gujjara Pratihara interloper. In fact, we find that this inscription was written upon on both sides. Small-sized copper plates were used for writing and recording royal land grants. The donors' ancestors were often mentioned here, and also we find that their achievements were elaborated upon. There were also multi-plate inscriptions, right? The most important among these was the Trifali Tamra Sasana of Odisha, which was actually a 3-plate inscription, as you can understand from the name. This was a deed written on 3 plates, with the outer walls of the first and the third plates being left blank in order to preserve the writing in between. The Paitan epigraph of the 13th century belonging to the Yadava king Ramchandra is another example. Multiplate inscriptions were pretty common in South India. We find that the Pallavas of South India used three-plate inscriptions very frequently, while the eastern Gangas of Orissa took this to another level and used 7 plates. The Palas and Senas of Bengal wrote long epigraphs, where the achievements of their ancestors dominated even if they wrote on single plates. The Chola kings too were prone to erecting massive inscriptions. Now, the Leiden inscription of Rajaraja I of the 10th, 11th century and the Tiruvalangadu inscription of Rajendra I of a later period comprise 21 and 31 plates respectively. The Karandai inscription of Rajendra I had 51 plates and weighed 216 pounds approximately. They contained the genealogies of Cholas and numerous land grants to Brahmins. Now let us come to the way in which some historians use inscriptions in order to portray the history of a particular period. Often they use a particular theme in order to write about a particular period. So we can come to Anjali Varma, who uses inscriptions to position women in the socio-economic framework of early medieval India. Right? Different languages and scripts have been used in these multifarious inscriptions that Anjali Varma uses. One of the important inscriptions that she talks about is the Govindapur stone inscription of 1137 found in the Gaya district, where there was a longing, which actually displayed a longing of a couple for the birth of a son. On the other hand, a contrarian view is projected in the Bayaram tank inscription of 1183 found in the Khammam district of Andhra Pradesh, where a girl child was welcomed. She also talks about the Sarnath stone inscription, which projects the Queen Govinda Chandra Kumara Devi and tells the tale of her accession to power. This inscription could be found in the Varanasi district in Uttar Pradesh. The Kaladur grant of Marasima II of 962, the Sangli copperplate inscription of Govind IV Suvarna Varsha of 933 in Kolhapur district, Maharashtra, the Hebbal inscription 933-40, the Kalidindi grant of the Eastern Chalukya king Rajaraja I of 1031, the Panhera inscription of 1059 of Malwa, and an inscription of the Chahamanas of Nadula in 1160 provide abundant information. We learn of marriage alliances, intercaste, interclan, interdynasty, and even rules of endogamy and exogamy among the Rajputs and among the ruling lineages of the south. The Kanchipuram inscription of Narasimha Varman II in Chingalpur district talks about the superiority of a queen. So here importance is given to a female ruling monarch. Inscriptions abound and the list remains endless. Now let us proceed towards South India. Right? Here we will take up the work of Noboru Karashima, who is a major historian of South India and for whom inscriptional evidence was the mainstay of his observations on the historical processes of South India. One of the early inscriptions that he refers to is the Pallankoil copper plates of the mid-6th century, which records a grant of land to a Jain temple near Kanchipuram. As one of the first inscriptions in Tamil, it featured Simhavarman, the Pallava king, the father of Simhavishnu, as the donor. Certain copperplate charters in Sanskrit and Prakrit, denoting land grants made to Brahmins, often provided indications that North Indian influence was being felt down in the south. The kings were addressed as Dharma Maharaja Dhiraja, and they performed Asmaveda and other Vedic sacrifices. Now, the Chalukya, Pandya, and Pallava kings frequently made land grants to Brahmins, many of which were recorded in inscriptions. Now, temple construction proliferated at this time, and agriculture, and therefore there was a need for higher agricultural production, because this was needed for the maintenance of the temples and for the innumerable Brahmins who were attached to these temples. Thus, forest lands were reclaimed, and as known from a 6th century inscription around Goa, we find that land was granted to a Brahmin, and he was given the permission to clear the forest and arrange for cultivation there. Apart from this, we see the Rayakota copperplate inscription of the 8th century. This records a grant of land cleared of trees to the Brahmins, to a Brahmin, while the Bahur and the copperplate inscription tells us that the Pallavas actually granted 3 villages to Brahmins. Grants made to high officials were also noted here. The Jambukeshwaram inscriptions note that Kulatunga III granted a Palavur Kilavan, which is a title, 2 hamlets as his lifetime holding. Then we come to information on technical or technological innovations. Efforts at technological improvements like irrigation can be proved from inscriptions as well. Massive tanks were constructed to supplement the inadequate supply of river waters. A 6th century inscription of Srikakulam of Andhra notes that land was granted to a Brahmin with a water tank, possibly constructed by Indravarman of the eastern Gangas. Copperplate inscriptions of the Pallavas refer to water tanks in Tondai Mandalam. The Kasakudi plates of Nandivarman II and Kuram plates of Parameshwara Varman are 2 other examples. Channels to draw water from rivers and later sluices were actually constructed under tanks for irrigation. These find mention in numerous Pallava and Pandyan inscriptions of the 8th and 9th centuries. Control of water supply necessitated officials, and an early Chola inscription from Allur near Tiruchirappalli names a Talai Vachannar for managing Talaive or the head sluice. So inscriptions had multifaceted subject matter. There was information on temple construction, urbanization, building activity, trading activity, tax collection, and so on. Chattopadhyay tells us that epigraphic information is vital for any discussion of urbanization in India. He tells us that literary evidence alone cannot give us a proper description of an urban center. He notes from Epigraphia Indica, Volume 9, the Ghatiyala inscription of 861 from around Jodhpur, which tells us of the establishment of Hattas and Mahajanas by a Pratihara king. These Hattas and Mahajanas actually signified a thickening of population, which was possibly in the direction towards later urbanization. He also refers to 2 10th century inscriptions belonging to the region of the Kalachuris, which speak of 7 urban spaces in the Jabalpur area of Madhya Pradesh. These epigraphs mention Karitalai and Bilhari as two centers of commercial exchange. Now we know that there was the existence of merchant guilds, and these too can be garnered from inscriptions. The merchant guilds were known as Mani Giramam in the south, and from a 5th century inscription and a Kottayam inscription of Sthanu Ravi of the 9th century, we get proof of the existence of merchant guilds like this. Another 8th century inscription in Aihole, Karnataka, and early Chola inscriptions also mention Aniruvar, or again a merchant guild. The Pollanarua stone inscription of the 12th century records the induction of Tamil Velaikara soldiers by the Simhalese king. Velaikara soldiers were actually mercenary soldiers. We can continue on diverse subject matter of the inscriptions. The Gadwal plates of Vikramaditya I of 670 CE refer to the huge ramparts of Kanchipuram, the capital city of the Pallavas. There were also a number of early Tamil inscriptions which tells us about Jain monks living in rock shelters around Madurai, which was the principal seat of the Pandya dynasty. Inscriptions on 2 stone slabs have been found near one of the 3 Jain temples in Belgaum, built by an official of Kartavirya IV, who was a Ratta prince around 1200 CE. The Ratta lineage originated with the Rashtrakuta king Krishna III. Written in Canaries and interspersed with Sanskrit, these inscriptions record donations made to a Jain temple named Ratta Jinalaya around 1200. Now let us come to the language in which, or the number of languages in which these inscriptions were written. Sanskrit became important for engraving inscriptions from the Gupta period. At that time, Sanskrit was the primary medium of communication for administrative purposes. Sanskrit had reached a very high classical standard. Brahmanical records in Ayodhya, Mathura, and Nagarjunakonda were certainly the best examples of refined Sanskrit. Buddhist and Jain inscriptions found in some of these sites also displayed excellent use of Sanskrit. It must, however, be remembered that even when Prakrit was prolifically used in ancient India, Sanskrit had been the primary literary language in the Indic space. Now, standard classical Sanskrit was the norm from the Gupta era to the early medieval period. Especially, we find Sanskrit in the Prashastis. However, as the medieval progresses, Sanskrit becomes more functional and is often tinged with vernacular influence, writes Salomon. He points to the Siadoni inscription as an example. Finally, there was the third phase of semi-literate Sanskrit found in later copperplate charters in eastern India. Certain new languages emerged during this time. Among the new Indo-Aryan languages, Marathi and Uriya can be found in some very early 11th century inscriptions. In fact, with the progress of Dravidian influence, these languages reached the level of imperial languages. In fact, Sanskrit was pushed slightly to the background from around this time. 300 inscriptions in Marathi have been discovered. They were mostly from the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, and they were found not only in Maharashtra but also in neighboring Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh. The Yadavas of Devgiri and the Silaharas of North Konkan used Marathi language the most. The Devanagari and Kannada scripts have been used in many of the stone and copperplate donative charters. Oriya was another language whose importance magnified increasingly. The Eastern Ganga kings and their successors, the Suryavamsi Gajapatis, were prolific in installing Oriya inscriptions. Initially, we find donations inscribed in stone in Gauri or Proto-Bengali. The Orissa script developed from the 14th century, though many Oriya inscriptions were written in the Devanagari script. The volume of inscriptions in Oriya far surpassed the number in Marathi. A number of inscriptions on temples as well as on stone have been found in Bengali. However, they belong to a later period, that is mostly in the 18th and 19th centuries, though one has been from the 15th century. They were mostly dedicatory in nature. Inscriptions in the Dravidian languages are numerous. Tamil and Kannada epigraphs dominate in medieval India, and their numbers far surpass the earlier ones in the Aryan languages. The Cholas and the Pandyas were prolific in engraving on various durable material, stone records, temple walls, copper plates, etc. And Tamil was their language of choice here. In fact, they recorded their private inscriptions in the Tamil languages. However, the copper plate inscriptions were primarily in Sanskrit because they recorded grants made by kings. Finally, the Tiruttani and Velangeri copper plates of the 9th century and of 930 CE, using both Sanskrit and Tamil, are grants of the later Pallavas and Cholas. Inscriptions in Kannada and Telugu more or less followed the above pattern. Overall, there are many thousands of inscriptions and engravings in the languages of the South during this period. We may imagine that the past speaks to us through these multifarious inscriptions. Thank you.